I really want to start meditating, but I'm scared of one thing, that I'm going to lose my edge. By now, the ancient practice of meditation is battle tested. Its ability to reduce stress and anxiety while boosting happiness is beyond debate. But if you're an ambitious person who thinks that meditation means becoming woo-woo, pay close attention.
If we are living our lives in a way that we have to be constantly running away from ourselves, then that is not freedom.
That's Cara Lai, a meditation teacher who's been on a lifelong quest to deeper understand the meaning of life. Cara found that the benefits of meditation are not about just becoming calmer. It can help you set better boundaries, make clear decisions, and redirect your energy towards what truly matters to you.
It would be a huge ripoff to be born a human being and to not be able to handle it.
Before we jump into this conversation, if you're a driven professional who struggles to set boundaries and to find work that truly moves you, we have a group coaching program for you. Check out radreads.co/coaching. Here's my conversation with Cara Lai.
Why is meditation important? And I wanted to start with the question, you said it had a big impact in your life. Well, meditation had an impact and you've taught meditation. How our audience is very kind of transactional, so to speak. So they want to know, and I presume not a lot of them are regular practitioners. They want to know what's the benefit. So maybe I would start with a more personal question where you said it had a big impact on you. How do you describe that big impact?
Yeah. Well, for me, and I think it obviously would be different for different people how it impacts them. But for me, one of the first things that I noticed was that I had a lot of social anxiety. And I don't mean like I was like painfully shy or anything. It was just kind of like this constant buzz of, do people like me? Do they not? And wanting to make sure that they did, and always wondering if I fit in, and which I think is pretty common. I don't think that I was like really that out there with my level of anxiety in that way, but it just suddenly settled. And it wasn't that it went away. It was more like there was a shift in perspective where instead of me being filled with it, I was observing it. And it just became one aspect of my experience amongst many, which freed me up to see a lot more of what was going on and be present for the sunrise and, the wind blowing across my face and just the multitude of other parts of experience that we're missing because we're so contracted around a problem. And to see that wasn't me, my anxiety wasn't me and who I was so liberating, because it was then okay for it to be happening or not happening. And I had a choice to go into it or not.
Yeah, beautiful. And so I love your answer and that it's so spot on. I mean, I think of it, what I hear you saying is like, maybe it's like this kind of low grade anxiety, kind of like background noise that might not be debilitating in kind of carrying on as a human. Again, I'm speaking what I heard on your experience.
Yeah.
But similar to my experience, it's not debilitating. I describe it what you just said as like, imagine you're listening to AirPods or like these big closed headphones and you're listening to like really loud music. And you might even enjoy the music. For me, it's like hardcore techno or dance music and so on, like bopping your head and all that. And you're doing it for hours and hours and hours, and you like it. And you take it off and you just go, holy shit, that was really loud. And in my experience, I've seen meditation be like, oh my God, I didn't know that there was this like whirring background noise. And for me, it was less about social anxiety and more on like envy and like catastrophizing, like everything can always go wrong. What's wrong with me, and I didn't notice a specific tipping point, but it was almost like the volume was slowly getting turned down. And then you wake up one day, you're like, wait a minute, that thing's not there anymore, or it's much more quiet.
Yeah. And something else that started to happen was like, I mean, at first when I when I started practicing and recognizing, whoa, I don't have to just be completely consumed by this all the time. It was like, wow, okay, so now how do I make more of my experience not filled with anxiety and, just get to this place of more calm. But the longer I've practiced, the more I've seen, you know what, that's actually not not a very helpful goal for me to have, because I'm basically judging myself based on how much anxiety there is in my experience, which I don't always have control over. And what's started to become much more interesting to me has been whatever's happening, whether there's anxiety or envy or whatever, getting really interested in that, because there's now space and it's just one aspect of my experience. There's the energy and the possibility of actually getting interested in that and being curious, like, what is this really about for me? What is that anxiety really about right now? Is there something that is unexamined here that I could actually understand a little bit more about what I'm deeply wanting and needing? And, maybe if with the case of anxiety, it's like, oh, I really feel like I need to belong, and I feel insecure about whether or not I do belong. I have like this kind of sense of being an imposter. And when I can identify that deeper root of what's happening, I can actually open to that and offer some compassion to that place. And then real transformation can start to happen. And so it stops becoming a quest to just like have peace all the time. And everything starts to become fodder for meditation.
Wow. There's a lot you just said there. I think, one thing that even as someone who's a longish term meditator, I've been meditating for about a decade for roughly 40 minutes a day. And we could talk about some of the problematic, I'm going to ask you about some of my problematic tendencies that I had with meditation a bit later. But I think this is a really, if I put my beginner hat on, I think that there's a belief that meditation will like solve a problem. And even the way I framed the question at the beginning in response to what you said is like, well, I have social anxiety, or I'm a very envious person, or I have this kind of catastrophizing thinking. And if I meditate enough, then it will go away. And you reframed it, and the way I heard it is like, it doesn't go away, but there's a separation from it, and then you can observe what's happening. And then from that, you kind of get launched into new, nooks and crannies of your psyche. Is that a
Totally.
fair paraphrase?
Yeah. And at the same time, you're developing the skill of kindness, because that's the instruction around mindfulness, is to approach your experience with kindness. And so kindness is being applied to all these nooks and crannies of your psyche. And that's what heals and transforms it. So, yeah, I think it's kind of inevitable, especially in our culture, to at first approach meditation from this, like you said, like a transactional place. Like, what am I
Like
going to get out of
exercise.
this? Yeah. It's like, if I just like keep on pumping this iron, then like my muscle's going to get huge, and I'm not going to I'm going to be invulnerable. But actually, we're not trying to make it so that we're invulnerable. We're trying to actually get more vulnerable and expand our window of tolerance, so that actually it's okay for anything to be happening, because not only can I handle it, I can actually really be interested in it and use it for transformation.
Yeah. It's so well said. And I want to come in with two. So as I was telling you before, the listeners of this podcast are very driven, very kind of go get them, type A's, Enneagram 2s, or is it 3s? I forget. But they are intrigued by this. They've heard all the studies, the benefits, the whatever about meditation. But I want to put two kind of criticisms or fears that they have about the practice. The first is use the word kindness. You've used the word vulnerable. In general, hyper-driven people, it's not that they don't like kindness, but they associate kindness with like not having an edge, or not being tough, or being trampled upon. And vulnerable might be perceived as weakness. And so I'll frame the first kind of a rejection or fear that people have with meditation is that I'm going to lose my edge. So I'm this like really driven person. And if I start like feeling kind, feeling vulnerable, dancing with these, this strange cocktail of social anxiety and leaning into my envy, then I'm going to like lose, I'm not going to be this driven person. I'm going to lose my edge.
Yeah.
How do you react to that?
I mean, I have a lot of things to say about this. And so one unexpected thing that came from meditation for me is that I have so much better boundaries than I ever had. The word kindness elicits like, I don't know, you're like a doormat or something and you're just like, oh, whatever, I don't care. But actually real kindness includes kindness to yourself, and it has to include kindness to yourself. And that often means setting a boundary and saying no and being clear about what you can handle, what you want, what you don't want. And so there's something about that keeps an edge. I mean, that is an edge, having a boundary, it's an edge. And I've gotten so much better at protecting myself because of the kindness aspect of meditation. And then in terms of being driven, there is a way in which meditation kind of makes us question what we're doing. But it's really good to question what we're doing, because otherwise we're just going to be blindly going forward. And then all of a sudden, I ended up working for a year at drawing like on Flash in a climate controlled building. And like, just cause like that was what everyone told me I should do. And it was making me money. But like, if we don't question all the things that we're putting all our energy towards, then we're not going to end up doing something that really matters to us. So it's important to have these times in our lives where we're examining and pausing so that we can actually be directing all that energy towards something that feels in line with what we really value.
Yeah.
And so, like you might end up quitting your job, but ultimately isn't what we want to be going towards what matters to us, not just going to the thing that everyone tells us we should be liking and wanting and getting.
Yeah. Thank you. This question of what matters, or this reframe of what matters, is what I hear is, a lot of people's anxieties in their corporate job might be, I'm not doing the thing that matters, or I don't know what matters. And so, it's almost not like, do you lose your edge or do you keep your edge? But it's kind of like you find your truth, right? And your truth might transcend edge in kind of the corporate sense of it, right?
Yeah. Because I mean, if you think about it, like having an edge, depending on how you define it, could just be like a way that you play somebody else's game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I need my edge so that I can like get to the top of this thing, but it's like what the world wants for me or what I think I'm supposed to do, not what I actually want to do.
Yeah. And on the boundaries point, I was thinking, because I'm a people pleaser. I'm a people pleaser who hates rejection. And so that is the recipe to get trampled upon by lack of boundaries. And again, I don't know when, that's the cool, but could be frustrating thing about meditation is like, I don't really know when all it started to work, but I just know it works. Is it like year 2 or month 3 or year 10? Like, I don't think there's like a binary of like, okay, now I'm reaping the benefits of meditation. But just like a little funny story from yesterday, there was a big podcaster and he said, hey, Khe, do you want to come on my show? And I said, sure. And he kept proposing all these times at like 8 or 9 a.m. And one of my boundaries is I don't have meetings before 11 because I serve. And part of the reason I've done all this around my life is so that I can serve. So if I'm obliterating my own boundary for the thing that I've redesigned my life for, I've really fucked something up. And so I just held firm. And I was like, I'm sorry, I don't do meetings before 11. We came up with a compromise, 10, which is very, very workable for me. And Another version of me would have just said yes. Like, whatever you need, I'm so scared of losing this opportunity that I'm just going to say, like, you say 6 a.m., I'll do 6 a.m. I just don't want to lose this opportunity. And then I would have like lost a night of sleep, and then I would have like beat myself up because I'm like, why do you do this? Like, you don't, this goes against what you stand for. And then basically it was like, nope, I held my boundary. We came up with a compromise, right? To the point, it's like, I didn't hold firm on 11, but 10 works, and I still served. And then all that chatter, all those like wasted internal, like, why did you do this? Why didn't you do this? It was just gone. It was just like this simple decision. And I could think of like hundreds of like little tiny examples like that have kind of accrued over the years, and have just made me just happier or more content.
Yeah. And it probably made that podcast go better because you weren't hanging on to this sense of like resentment or like, whatever beating yourself up you would have done. I mean, it's such a great example because we don't usually think about the benefits in that way. We often think about, or people tend to think about the benefits of meditation being like, well, I'm just going to be like a nicer person, and I'm like not going to fly off the handle on other people, which might be true. But then there's also this whole other side of it. Like, I'm actually going to be a lot better at protecting myself. And as a result, other people are going to be trusting that when I say I can do something, I really mean it, or just trusting that I'm being honest, because so much of it is about honesty. And saying looking into our own experience and seeing what's really there.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, man. Okay. So the other criticism that people give, or the other challenge that they give on meditation, and again, these are kind of wound up professionals who they basically say, look, I'm convinced. I've read all the stuff. I know meditation's good for me. I'm scared of what it was going to dredge up for me if literally the words they use, if I go there. And I'm, if you're listening on audio, I'm doing giant air quotes on go there. But there's this fear of this kind of like, and these are people that, have had like good like they grew up middle class or upper class and their parents loved them and they went to good college. It's not, like poverty, physical abuse, those types of situations. It's more like, I was made fun of, or I felt like an outsider. I didn't like the way my body looked, or so on. But they have this real fear. I'll use myself as an example. Is like, I've been losing my hair since I was 20, and I just hate that. I feel crappy about it.
You have so much hair though.
I know, but I've nailed the angle.
A lot more before. Oh, you've nailed the angle.
I've nailed the angle. So like, okay. I'll give you this really example. It's like, I don't feel, so I was like this like pretty bad bald spot in the back of my head. When I go to Target on the self-checkout, it's the worst angle because it just goes like right. And I refuse to look in the camera. Like, I refuse to see it. And I'm like, I'm even getting worked up right now. I'm like, until I can find peace with that, like, I'm not free, right? Like, there's something eating me. Oh, like there's something consuming me. I'm not free. And so like, it's part of, and actually some of the practices that I've done with our shared friend has actually helped a lot with that, because there is this, like, I don't love myself as much because of this quote unquote defect that I see in myself. But we'll circle back on that one. But to use that example, if you had those feelings about, I don't like the way I look, and you're like, meditation is just going to make me go inwards. I'm going to, with all the absence of distraction and stimuli and input, I'm going to have to confront these feelings, and then it's going to lead to all these other feelings. Like, I'd rather just keep Pandora's box shut and just kind of like go on with my life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, fair. I mean, it's true, actually. And I think that actually part of what turns people away from meditation is that they encounter some of this stuff early on, and then they think they're doing it wrong. It's like, well, when I sit and meditate, it's not peaceful. So I must like not know how to do it or something. But actually, that probably means that you're doing it right. And I don't want to scare people off, but to be honest about it upfront is actually really helpful, because there very well may be comfortable and peaceful experiences that you experience, and probably will be, but there's also a really good reason that we don't want to just sit still all the time. There's a reason that we don't just like sit and eat our bowl of cereal without like looking at our phone at the same time. It's like when you sit and do nothing, you start to feel the feelings that you were trying to avoid by distracting yourself. But if we are living our lives in a way that we have to be constantly running away from ourselves, then that is not freedom. So we can choose to like stay in the matrix and just run around in circles away from ourselves, never really getting away from ourselves. Or we can just open to the possibility that maybe there's another way. Maybe there's a way to be alive that doesn't require constantly avoiding experience. And actually the opposite could be true. There's a way to live a life where we can embrace our experience fully, and that we're equipped to do that. I just fully believe that it would be a huge ripoff to be born a human being and to not be able to handle it.
Yeah.
And so I think that we can, I think we are equipped with what we need to be able to fully be in these bodies, in this world that's always changing, and to look directly at it. And
Yeah.
we start to just gain more and more confidence. There's maybe an initial hump when we first start meditating. It's like, whoa, that's really hard. That's a lot. And, it feels daunting because it's like, is this how it's going to be always? But it's not actually, because we start to develop skills like, oh, and confidence, like, oh, I met that moment. Can I meet the next one and the next one? And then what could change?
Wow. It's funny because you mentioned, so I gave you that Target example with the cameras. It also happens with like, if there's any pictures of me that show like part of my bald spot, I just like delete them from my phone. Or but I was in this dilemma. I'm an avid surfer. And so I was surfing, and it's very hard to get surfing shots. But there happened to be a cameraman in the water, and I just swam up to him and I'm like, hey, can I pay you to take a few shots of me? It's the only way you get good pictures. And it would be, I'm not good enough to just like have a cameraman on tap. Like that would be just so arrogant and just so douchey. And so this cameraman was there, and so he snapped like 30 pictures of me. But the thing about surfing is like, I can't control where my head, like if we were at a cocktail party, I would like know, like, okay, like stay away from mirrors, or like, like if there's someone really tall from you, like, stand in this direction, like relative to them or whatever. But in surfing, you have like no control over that, especially because this cameraman's like floating around in the water. And so he took these pictures and he sent them back. And of course, even as he was doing it, I was like, there's gonna be all these pictures of this bald spot that I just fucking hate looking at. But I love surfing, and I'm gonna be like in this, like caught in this dilemma. Like, do I look at this thing I love to do, or do I dislike myself enough to just not look at it? And right. And so I just I sat with it, right? And it was like kind of challenging. And I'm getting like a little emotional thinking about it. It was kind of challenging. It was very emotional because I never actually sat with it. Like if there's any picture of me losing my hair, I just delete it from my phone. And so I'm kind of in denial in some way. And so I just sat with it and it's like looked at the pictures, and I was just like telling the person in the photos, like, hey, like, I love you, man. You're awesome. And just like feeling, these like different kind of meditation practices that I've learned from Jess Mori. And I was like, oh, wow. So after I was like, wow, like we've like crossed this, like, this is a big step, like in like my internal, like I've thought about losing my hair multiple hours a day, every single day of my life since I turned 20 and I'm 45. That is a lot of wasted REM cycles, a lot of wasted brain cycles. So I went a little bit off piece, but that was in the it did dredge. And this is like a 20-year period of something that's been consuming me internally. And only now have I, because of meditation, taken like a small step towards self-healing. And so it kind of like it shows like so many things like wrapped into one in this like kind of simple example, so to speak.
Yeah. And even in this simple example, I feel like there's probably a lot more that could happen, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
because in sitting and looking at those pictures or passing a mirror and seeing your bod spot, it's like, what exactly is it that bothers you so much about that? What with something like that hits so deep emotionally and feels so painful, it's charged, it's not just about the bald spot,
Yeah.
right?
No,
There's
definitely not.
obviously more there. And I'd be curious to know if that's something that you've explored, or if that's
Yeah.
something that you would be interested
Mhm.
in exploring.
Yeah, I mean, I've explored it in a few ways. I explored it a lot with kind of, I would say, philosophy. One of my long tenured coaches was a practical philosopher. And so we would kind of like find an example like this and just be like, well, what does it mean? And then, like kind of applying a Socratic dialogue with a kind of an objective, caring person about like, what does it mean? And so I'll share a few. One was like, there's kind of this, for a long time, there's like a kind of fear of death. So it's like, it's a reminder of aging and like of a withering body, so to speak. And I think the fear of death was actually much more tied to the point you made earlier, which is like, am I doing something that matters? It's like, I'm going to run out of time on this planet. And what a shame it would have been to do something that didn't matter this whole time. So actually, my fear of death was actually much more a fear of not having done something that mattered in this kind of thing we call a lifetime. And once I became more in alignment, then that fear kind of like went away. So that was one of them. Another one, which is a real, very like strong one, is just like unlovability. Like I just have this like fundamental fear that has come up like since I was a kid, and I've done some attachment work with Jess and others, which is just like, when people find out, people truly know me, they're actually not going to love me.
Yeah.
And so, any physical blemish is just another reason to give them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's probably a big one, which ultimately is actually, when you really pull that one further, is like, I'm not sure that I love myself. And that's why it's so hard to look at those pictures, because it's a reminder that like, do you actually love this person?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's really not knowing if I am lovable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that, of course, that would be super painful to have a reminder of that.
Yeah.
Of that degree of uncertainty. It's just like so important to feel like you're worthy of love. That's like what keeps us alive as humans, is feeling that sense of worthiness. And so anything that makes us think that we're not, of course we would want to just like block that out in some way from our experience.
Yeah. And as listeners know, I'm like the master coper. And so, you mentioned the example of like, I mean, full disclosure, I was eating eggs before and watching The Wire while I was, eating my breakfast this morning, watching TV. But I am the master at coping. And the way that I'm the master at coping is like, whenever I feel that, what we just described, that like I'm broken, I'm unlovable, like I have, I'm flawed, I just go straight into like something super intense, to just like, almost like if like there was like a bank balance, so like the bank balance was going low, like I'm low on love. And so I'm like, but I have all these tools. And so it's like work and fitness, and now like, being an influencer, like social media, alcohol for a long time, reading like reading self-improvement books, right? And so like I had all these tools, even meditation, which we could talk about, kind of spiritual bypass later. But like I had all these tools that were just like, that thing, like staring at that picture and what it evokes in me, I don't ever want to feel that. And so like, let me just channel it. And And I think the thing that's interesting for people listening is that so many of the coping mechanisms, with the exception of alcohol, are generally validated by society. It's like society likes like a fit person who's a workaholic. Like usually they're like, that person's doing great, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of fucked up when
Yeah.
your coping mechanism is actually celebrated by society, because it makes it even more daunting to like disengineer the whole puzzle that we've.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. But I think the silver lining is that all that energy doesn't need to just get the kibosh put on it when we start having a practice like this. In fact, I think it's like super useful. You just redirect it. And you know, if you have so much energy and so much willingness to learn and find a new way and innovate, and those are all the qualities that are really useful in mindfulness practice. It's just like we've been kind of letting them be dispersed into the things that other people say are what we should be doing. But once we identify what we want to be doing, then we can pour all that energy into that thing.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, of course there's things that come up like we're spiritual bypass, which I don't know if your listeners understand what that means, but you know, this way that we can use meditation to avoid something. But you know, we learn as we go, and you're not a perfect meditator right away, and I'm not either. You know, actually, like it's the whole process is learning how to hone in on what real mindfulness looks like. And so we're kind of like getting more and more efficient with the way that we practice and directing more and more energy towards what really matters as we keep going on the path.
Yeah, that's so well said. It almost like what I hear you saying, it's almost like a clean energy system, right?
Yeah.
It's, you know, before if you're like drinking and you're a workaholic and like it's just like your like nastiest diesel engine, and like everything still works fine on the like from the outside looking in, but when you think about all the different costs, like to the environment, to yourself, to your lungs, you're just like, this thing's going to break soon, right? And then but on the other side of it, if you had like solar or some like clean energy, then it's totally it works, right? It just works, and the externalities are actually beneficial to everyone versus like destroying you in the process.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we don't realize that there's another way that is like clean.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we think we have to like pollute the planet on the way to success.
Yeah.
But actually it's not true. There's something that we can do that feels good to us and good to the world.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, so you had asked me, you know, about like this process of, you know, it's not about the bald spot. There's like these multiple layers below. And so in my experience, meditation kind of like turned the volume down on everything, or turn the intensity down inside my brain. And so what was really happening could resurface, or could kind of like bob to the surface and be like, oh, that's actually, you feel this way, or this is actually reminding you of this childhood experience, and so on. But a lot of that has actually been facilitated by it's kind of like combining a meditation process with different types of coaching and therapy. And so how do you see kind of like the role of, like, if someone spends a lot of time meditating, like, are they able to kind of pull at the layers like in their own head, you know, kind of like, oh, where's this? Or is that like a separate, attached, adjacent practice?
Yeah, I think different ways of offering meditation instructions will just direct people towards different things. You know, there are ways of talking about meditation practice which don't invite any curiosity or interest in the content of the thought. Actually, that can still, there's kind of no way to avoid insight into the content of the thought and stories and our patterns anyway. So even if the instructions are really like, do not go into the content, just, stay with the breath and just let the thoughts come and go, there will still be insight into the patterns that we have and the deeper kind of yearnings that we have. But there are also ways to emphasize in meditation that it's okay to honor, and it's important actually to honor whatever comes up, including the content of the thoughts and emotions that we have, and that not to avoid it. It is one thing to get lost in the content and the story and think that the point of meditation is to chew on that and to figure it all out and to get to the bottom of it. But what I'm talking about here isn't that. It's just more about finding a centered place and being open to all of the experience that unfolds around us, including all the things that we think and the content of the thought, and it doesn't, it's different from, you see what I'm saying? It's like, there's a difference between chewing and just getting really involved with our thoughts and like doing them, actively thinking them and figuring them out, and bearing witness in a way that really honors and is deeply caring and careful with the content of our thought. And I mean, I guess in practice, what this might look like could be you're focusing on your body, you're noticing the body and feeling the sensations there, and then allowing thoughts to be part of what gets noticed as well. So it's like thoughts come through, but since we're connected to something that's happening in real time, it's harder to get lost in them. And then actually easier to observe them because we're not lost in them.
I was going to add to that, and I think this will probably resonate with a lot of our listeners, is that people listening to this podcast are very heady folks. So everything it's thoughts. And I've actually heard this often. And I was one of them, like, I don't ever feel my body. I don't feel anything. And I guess they would be called somatic meditations, but, I would do these meditations in the past, and someone would say like, oh, where are you feeling stress in your body right now? And I'd be like, oh, in my sap or in my shoulder or something. And they're like, what shape does it have? I don't know. Like, can you give it like, what's the texture of it? Or what's, what color is it? Is it moving? And I'm like, I don't know. All I know is like, that's the thing. It's like the thought, like I'm stressed, right? And one thing that I've learned, and this has been very recent, probably in the past 6 months, is this kind of interplay between thoughts and physical sensations. And so I know even now when I was looking at the picture of myself and I was like, okay, what is actually physically, like, I know the thought is like, I don't like this person. I don't like the way I look. It reminds me of all these bad things. But simultaneously, there was like this tightness in my chest, in my upper chest. It was like really tight. And then I was like, okay, so I'm having these thoughts. I don't like the way I look. And then I have this tightness in my chest. And I'm just like paying attention to the tightness in my chest. They're like a pair almost, like paired with the thoughts. And then like the tightness eventually just dissolves. Like you can breathe into it, just pay attention. You're just not going to like walk around with a perpetual, I wasn't going to walk around with a perpetual state of tightness in that moment. And then the thought went away once the tightness had gone. And it was almost like inverting the way that my operating system is always like thoughts, don't feel. And now it's more thought plus feeling. What kind of happens? How do they interact with one another? And then eventually the feeling, even like very negative feelings, sadness, anger, they dissolve physically in your body. And then the thought is, I'm still figuring it out, but it's just this like really powerful interplay that I don't think it took me 9 years to figure that out. And so I don't
Yeah.
think our listeners would even fully grasp what I just said.
Yeah, well, everyone has different levels of connection to their body, and it's often the case that people who first come to meditation feel very disconnected from their bodies.
Okay.
That's normal, given the fact that our coping strategy for life is often just numbing out and going into the head, and we can't like just open to everything that we're feeling in our bodies at once, because it would be too much, and we spent a lifetime trying to not feel that, and so we just have to let it open to us on its own time when we start meditating. But what we notice is just what you described. It's like, actually, this thought and this like anxiety has much more to do with this sensation in my body than anything else. Like maybe I just like woke up with this tightness in my chest, and that dictated how my day went. But because I didn't recognize that, it got to dictate my day.
Mm-hmm.
And then in pausing and taking some time to notice the fullness of my experience, then now there's this thing that I can actually tend to with some care. And now I don't have to go about my day running away from it anymore.
Yeah. It's so simple, but it is, especially, I don't know if it's like a Western thing or there's people in this audience, but like every problem challenge is confronted with another thought. And so you just like stack all these thoughts, and no wonder it's saying, I mean, if you're stacking thoughts on top of thoughts and they're challenging thoughts, then that's probably a definition of anxiety.
For sure.
Like,
yeah. And we don't tend to know another way of dealing with problems other than thinking about them. And so we get tangled up in a lot of anxiety as a result of that. And meditation offers us this other way of approaching problems, which isn't to grapple with them or figure them out, but actually just to be with them and to let go of needing to solve them, at least for a little while, and just get curious, like what is actually happening. And sometimes the problem dissolves in a way, and because oftentimes so much of the problem had more to do with us feeling like we had to figure it out.
Oh, yeah.
And when actually I can pause and just relieve myself of the burden and the pressure of needing to have this figured out, then we see like, oh wow, actually that was the problem.
Yeah.
And maybe I can just say, I don't know, and leave it there, at least for now. And what a relief that is, because there's so many things that we try to solve that we can't. And we just don't. If we could, we would do it. But instead, we just get really pissed at ourselves and frustrated for not being able to fix a problem that doesn't have a solution, at least not yet.
Yeah. Beautiful. I always wonder this kind of random thought experiment. It's like, what if, and I just took challenging emotions like fear, anxiety, worry, sadness, anger. What if we didn't have words for those emotions or emotions? And so let's say you were, I don't know, attacked by a bear. Like your brain couldn't say, I'm scared, because it did, like the word didn't exist. But then you would just have, like, obviously you would know fear at a physical level. And so it's just like this like random thought experiment, like, oh, like what would it look like if we could never say like, I'm worried? Because that just didn't, you would still know you had some sensation of discomfort that we call worry, or we call anxiety, or we call fear.
Yeah, like, so what you're pointing to is sort of like, what if we had no choice to be fully connected with our body as the thing that was informing us, and not just our mind? Because what we usually do is we go about the world conceptualizing everything, like we walk into a room and it's like, there's a bed, there's a desk, there's a chair, there's a lamp, but we're not actually fully connecting with the real-time experience of those things. We're just kind of pigeonholing them into these concepts. But if we were to drop the concepts and just be with the experience, it would be something more like shapes and colors and, whatever temperature that the room is and whatever ambient sounds there are in the room. And it would just be a more raw perhaps vibrant and full-bodied experience. But because we're so used to just living in our mind world, everything just becomes fixed into concepts, and we stop looking and we stop experiencing the world because we think we know it,
Yeah.
because our minds decided this is a lamp.
Yeah. And I'll rephrase that and reinterpret that into a very pragmatic example, because I could feel like some of our listeners like, what the fuck are these two talking about at this point? But here's the example, and feel free to tack onto it or challenge or adjust. So you have this like huge client, maybe they represent 70% of your business, and you wake up one morning and the client says, I'm ending the contract. And so immediately, like, massive fear, right? It's like the livelihood of your business. And so I could imagine one of our listeners being like, wait, so I lose this big client and you're telling me to just pay attention to my body, because that's like the playbook here. Like, and again, let's say you have like, you start to get like a stomach churning, so to speak, in that moment. And so what's interesting is, because I think that what a non-meditator would think we're saying is that you don't need to start coming up with a solution immediately, and the solution's going to just like find you, and there's like this urgency, like solve this problem right away, even though like maybe all businesses are closed because it's 7 a.m, like you literally can't call anyone because everyone's still at their houses. And so, but what I would interpret it, and then I'll ask kind of your perspective on it, is like, in that moment, that fear, that cavity in your stomach is A, it's going to pass, right? And B, it's going to, if you kind of embrace it with love versus like this thing you have to fight and like get rid of and solve, then it's gonna like, it's actually going to be on your team. Like, it was going to like be this like creative partner, because you're not like in this fight or flight mode. Your body is much stiller. And then it doesn't mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it doesn't mean that you're not going to try to come up with a solution. It just doesn't mean that like you're going to like 150% of your thoughts will just be like, what do I need to do now? What do I need to do now? What's going to go wrong? What's going to go wrong? What's going to go wrong? Like, you'll still address those questions, but in a way that is like with a cleaner energy, with a solar, with a solar panel rather than a diesel engine.
Yeah. And I think it can have the effect of becoming more efficient, because your mind isn't consumed by thoughts of fear, because that's no longer the thing that is driving you. Because we're no longer caught in the belief that I can't be okay until this problem is solved, and that there's actually something wrong with me because this problem isn't solved and I did something wrong. And also, if we let that be what drives our actions in the world, then we're actually fueling that. We're creating the conditions for that to arise again. And because, that worked as fuel last time. So that encouragement makes it come back again and again. And then all of a sudden we're living our lives based on the fuel of fear. And that's not a happy place to live from.
Ooh. That is profound. That's like, we're turning that into a TikTok. We're living our lives fueled from a place of fear, which I lived a good chunk of my life with that as fuel. And that probably, I know I still have traces of it, but it's much cleaner. But yeah, wow, that is.
Yeah. And I really respect what you did to change the way that you were living your life. And I think that's not an easy thing to do. And a lot of us are we feel more entrenched in the world and engaged with things that all of a sudden we're starting to realize this isn't actually what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know how to extricate ourselves from that. But this is a way to start, actually, is just to reclaim some of our own attention. It's like, oh, I have to do this just because it's what I've always done. And it's because what other people said I have to do. But we've never taken time to ask ourselves what we actually want. What do I want to do? How do I want to spend not just my years and my months, but my moments. Do I want to spend them like obsessing over this thing or being filled with fear about not being good enough? Maybe not, but I don't know what I do want. And I can't know until I just pause and take a little bit of time to feel what I'm feeling and get familiar with that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is so eloquently and beautifully put. Makes me want to go. I think I'll go meditate after this podcast.
Yeah, do you want to do a 3-month retreat?
Yeah. I do want to do. I've been waiting for my kids to get old enough because I don't want to be away from them for that long. But they're crossing over the point where my eldest just like doesn't even know I'm around anymore. So if I went on a 10-day retreat, she'd be like, might not even ask, "Where's dad?" So that phase of my life is reopening. But I'd love to ask you as our last question, and I honestly didn't want to spend too much time on the like how to start meditating. I think there's so much information out there, and I'm sure you could point us to other guides as well. But one of the questions that I think a lot of people will be listening to this be like, okay, you guys got me convinced. I'm into this. I want to start. That opens up this next nebulous thing. It's like there's meditation is such an open-ended practice that has so many ways of doing it. But if you were to kind of distill it down to kind of a starter pack type way to get going, what are a few ways that and it could be anything from like an actual practice to use this app or read this book or watch this YouTube video? What are a few ways that you kind of tell people to go from 0 to 1?
Yeah, great. Well, I'll say a couple things. One, if you don't want to go and do any like research and download an app or anything, I'll tell you what I did when I first started, which was 8 minutes a day.
Okay.
And it's just, you sit for 8 minutes and you pick something to pay attention to, whether it's a place in your body, your breath, or the sounds in the room. Something that feels okay to be with, as long as it's not like something really unpleasant, like a lot of pain or something. So find something that feels okay in your experience and just lightly notice it from moment to moment. Whenever you get lost in thought, just notice that and gently bring your attention back to that anchor. So you're going to get lost in thought, and it's not a big deal. It's actually part of the process. So there's no judgment or beating yourself up for that. Just notice when it happens and pause there for a second, and then gently guide the attention back to that anchor and stay there and just notice it as it moves and changes from moment to moment. And that's it for 8 minutes a day. So I had some pretty cool experiences just from doing that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a light lift,
I love that.
Most people
you don't
have
need
8
anything.
minutes. Yeah.
I love that.
And then the other thing is, if you want more detailed instructions and the how and why of meditating, I really recommend the 10% Happier app. There's a lot of meditation apps, but this one has very clear instructions on how to meditate with some of the best teachers that I know of. So yeah, I think those would be my 2 top recommendations.
I love that. And I would say to go on the first one, I don't like to meditate with phones and stuff because it's like as soon as I'm done, I'm like, did I get any texts? But on the first one, I suspect that many of you who will try it, you're just going to be, the first time you do it, it's just going to be 8 minutes of thinking about your to-do list. So if that was me, I was like, I did it. I don't think I did it right. All I thought about was my to-do list. And then like I randomly thought about, yesterday's NBA finals game. And then I was kind of hungry and I thought about what I'm going to eat when this is done. Like, what would you tell me if that was my first 8 minutes doing that?
Well, 2 different things. One, I would say that's normal. But see if you can keep going and just keep noticing more and more. It's like next time, okay, you can actually apply like a little bit of a label every time you notice that you're thinking about your to-do list. Just like, oh, planning. and then at least like you start to get a little more, there's some noticing happening. Like you knew that you were thinking about your to-do list, right? So there's some more information and understanding that's being gained, even if it just seems like you're lost in thought. There actually is some clarity coming in. The other thing I would say is you don't have to meditate at a time when you're like about to plan your day and about to do a bunch of stuff. You could meditate at the end of the day when you're kind of like, all right, I'm kind of done. There might still be stuff on your mind, but it might not be as much. And you might not be like about to eat breakfast or something. So you're not thinking about that. It's just like you could find, it could be like when you just got home from work and you're the most ready to relax.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
meditate for 8 minutes.
I love that. I find it very hard to meditate in the middle of the day, the bookends, because I'm like just overrun by thoughts.
Yeah. A lot of
the
people have
bookends
that
work
experience.
really well, like first thing in the morning, first thing in the evening. Cara, this was so amazing. This is like such a beautiful reminder of why I do this podcast. It's like, this is the conversation that I want in the world. And so thank you for being a part of it, a partner, and sharing your wisdom with our community.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Khe. This is really fun. And maybe one day we'll get to meet and I'll get to give you like a noogie on your bald spot.
Yeah.
And let you know that I care about you.
Oh man, I got chilled just thinking about that, but I would welcome it. Where can people go learn more about you?
So my website is caralai.org, caralai.org. And that has my teaching schedule. There are also some online classes that I teach that are just drop-in, like donation-based classes. So they're free to join if you want to. And I offer those usually a couple times a week. One of them is a parenting class that I teach with actually Jess Morey, who you mentioned a few times, and our friend Ofosu Jones-Corte. So it's like mindfulness in parenting and how to be in the thick of like changing diapers and stuff while you're also trying to like be a serious meditator or a not serious meditator and just get started. You can also find me on the 10% Happier app. There's a bunch of meditations that I have on there, and I have a few podcasts that I've done with them.
Awesome. And we'll link those in the description. Thank you so much, Cara.
Yeah, thanks, Khe. So good to talk.
You too.